Hi, everyone. Welcome to SIG Node weekly meeting on April 11, 2023. We have a couple of topics on the agenda. So I see Don already responded to Kevin's request for approval on the DRA cap. So we can quickly move on to the second topic, which is the N-3 SKU by Jordan and Derek.
Yeah, Jordan, do you want to kick off the discussion on this?
Yeah, sure. Let me, if you will let me, I can share my screen and kind of pull up some of the diagrams and things.
I just gave you host, Jordan. You should be able to. Yeah.
Okay, great. Let's see. I think this works. All right, can you see that?
Looks good.
All right. Yeah, so I wanted to kick off a discussion. I'm kind of making the rounds of various SIGs that touch things on the node or care about SKU policies. So talked with Cluster Lifecycle last week and SIG Arch last week, and then Node and Network this week. So Node and Network are the two SIGs that actually own node components, so the kubelet and kubeproxy. So I care a lot about what folks here think about this. But the too long didn't read version of this is it would be really great if the oldest node that we support and the newest control plane we support worked together. That's the goal. And that was actually the goal of the current SKU policy, which was saying N-2 nodes support current control planes. But when we moved to a yearly support period, I guess a year or two ago, we realized that users actually need a couple months overlap after we release a new version for them to qualify and upgrade to it. And so if we release 3 minor versions in a year, we actually support the oldest minor version for a couple months after we cut a new minor version. And so there's like a 14-month support window. And that 2-month period is intended to let users qualify and upgrade. And so if we strictly support nodes that are 2 versions older, then in order for users to stay within like the supported SKU, they actually have to upgrade their nodes twice if they were wanting to leave their node pools at the oldest supported version and then jump them to the newest supported version. So in talking with Derek and other folks, it's pretty clear that node upgrades in particular are like way more disruptive to users' workloads. So control plane upgrades, you normally have like 1 or 3 control plane members. And user workloads don't have to take dependencies on control planes. So if the user workloads are running pods that don't actually care about the Kubernetes API server, they're happy to keep running even when the control plane's upgrading. But node upgrades, minor version node upgrades, require draining or spinning up new nodes. And so every workload in the cluster is going to have to get recreated or restarted in the process of doing a minor node upgrade. And so making people do 2 of those, especially when you might have like thousands of nodes in a cluster, is actually way more disruptive. So the goal was to see if we could let people just do a single node pool upgrade to get from the oldest version to the newest version. So that was the goal. The next thing we looked at was like, what would it actually cost us to do this? So there were 3 types of changes that I looked at, and this is where I would like feedback from folks in SIG Node if we've missed types of work or types of changes that would be impacted by expanding to 1 more version. But the 3 types of changes we looked at were how fast we can roll out new features, how quickly we can drop support for old deprecated, no longer supported features. And then the 3rd category was like REST API changes. The 3rd category is actually in really good shape ever since like 1.19. I think all the things that kubelet and node kubeproxy use are stable. They're at V1 levels. So we don't actually use any APIs that are going to go away at this point, which is awesome.
Hey, Jordan, just maybe one other comment that I realize we didn't capture in our discussion, but the alternative is that we could, as a community, just say, do more to support in-place updates of kubelets. And I think it's worthwhile, maybe we put some language in the CAP to explain why we wouldn't necessarily recommend that, because typically users would, one, that would impact the kubelet's ability to change to operating system updates. So for example, like doing a C group V1 to V2 migration in place is not really a thing we can do. And so maybe just some language in here that calls out like the kubelet could have chosen to do in-place updates, but we as a community probably feel that that is a bad idea because it would inhibit our ability to actually keep up with the pace of operating system innovation. And so like right now, it's been a benefit that we always recommend users drain their nodes before doing up maintenance. But I could see some folks pushing back on this and saying, well, why doesn't just you can just change the kubelet binary. You don't even need to do a drain. And I don't think it's a good idea for the SIG to take on that posture, but I want to call it out.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I
have an echo.
sorry.
In terms of like what,
Don, are you the echo?
oh, maybe
Maybe.
just muted, gone. Yep, I think you were. Feel free to unmute and interrupt me at any time if you have something you want to say. In terms of like what work it would actually take to achieve the goal of kind of this upgrading a node pool from the oldest version to the newest version non-disruptive, or with as little disruption as possible. I agree that supporting in-place upgrades across minor versions is probably way more work and therefore way less likely to actually get done. I really like sort of incremental improvements that give us a lot of bang for the buck. And so I did want to jump to some of the analysis. I actually looked through those types of changes over the past couple of years to see like how many new features did we actually delay until the oldest node supported a feature. And there were actually very few of them. Typically, we roll out new features and we just say, if you want to use the new features, you have to upgrade your nodes to a version that supports that feature, which I think is probably pretty reasonable. Like you want to use a new feature, you have to upgrade to a version that has that feature. Like there are maybe user experience things we could improve there to make it more obvious when a user tries to use a feature and their nodes aren't new enough, like make it fail in nicer ways or tell them earlier in the process. I think there are user experience improvements. But generally, we don't wait for all supported skewed nodes to support a feature before we say you can enable this and use this in newer nodes. Most of the time, the only times that we will delay is when it's like a security issue. So I think pod security standards waited to relax requirements on Windows nodes or Windows pods until we were sure that all kubelets would honor the pod OS field. Things like that. So it's pretty rare actually that we delay rollout of a feature until the N-2 node has support for it. More common was dropping deprecated functionality from the control plane once the N-2 node didn't need it. And so there were a few instances in SIG storage around like dropping in-tree volume plugins once the N-2 kubelet was guaranteed to be using CSI migration. But again, the cost of just like letting old code hang around for one more release and then dropping it is actually pretty low. At least that's the feedback I've gotten from SIG Node. I still have to talk to some of the other SIGs, but if we can make users' lives better by letting them upgrade their nodes at the cost of like ignoring a deprecated package for one more release before we delete it, that doesn't seem like a terrible trade-off. It's not impacting velocity of new features. It's impacting like cleanup of old deprecated stuff. So this was just like showing homework. These were, I went back 2 years to 1.22, I guess, and looked at enablement of new features, removal of deprecated stuff, and then removal of APIs, beta APIs. And tried to see which of these would have caused problems with n-3 skew. And so there was only one example of new feature that I could find. And there were a couple, sorry, two examples, both of which were SIG off. So maybe I'm shooting my own SIG in the foot by proposing this, but not really. In this case, we would have just left it in beta for one more release. It still would have been available for people to use on newer clusters. And here we would have waited one more release to relax validation for Windows pods. Anyway, that's the context and the proposal. What I'm looking for from this SIG is sort of gut reaction to this, like, support oldest node against newest control plane goal, and then pointing out anything that we missed in this analysis in terms of like types of work or types of features. If there are features that we waited to roll out until the oldest node supported them that I didn't have in this list, that'd be helpful to know. And then like some of the alternatives or other ways of accomplishing this goal, like what Derek pointed out. So I'll stop talking there and let other people talk.
Silence, Jordan, is that there's just widespread agreement that this is the right thing to do, and there was oversight when we changed the project support policy.
Yeah.
I think if do people find the language in the KEP clear about how to handle new features? So you know, I'm trying to think about features that are in flight right now from the Node SIG. So in place pod resource resizing. Is the language in the KEP here clarifying for how we would choose to enable that potentially in the future on by default at the API server side? Or is it unclear? Or if there's a particular resource that the kubelet is not yet tracking, but we've thought about tracking. I think Bernal, you and I and Sergey and Don had a conversation about file descriptors, for example. Like, to me, the key thing is that we are comfortable with the language that's in the KEP to understand when and how we choose to allow a feature to go on and off by default, or give appropriate guidance to those who come to the SIG on like the time frame they might be looking for that feature to be on by default. And if the language here is clear, that's good. If it's not, then that's probably the best thing we could gather together as a community to make sure that we give proper guidance to those going forward.
Yeah, for feature enablement, like there's a few places, like in the KEP template, there's a section around version skew that encourages people to think about how this rolls out across a cluster. If there are specific questions around like how does it behave on older nodes, that might be a good sort of sample question to put there as a prompt. I will note that like we already have n-1 and n-2 support, and so hopefully people are already asking these questions and already thinking about how this rolls out. And hopefully the only impact of this proposal would be for people who are actually waiting until the n-2 nodes have a feature enabled to turn something on in the control plane. So my sense is that it's not actually impacting most features. Most features enable in a way that the feature wouldn't work with an n-1 or n-2 node, and they would just tell the user, if you want to use this feature, you have to upgrade to a newer node. I also included a link, where was it? Here we go. One of the ways that we enable features today is we just default them on in a given release, and then as that release sort of propagates back into skewed nodes, more and more releases support a feature. That's not actually a really terrific way to roll out features. It kind of is in some ways it's the worst of both worlds. Like it's slow to make progress because it's like a 4-month gap between each release. And it also leaves clusters that have skewed nodes in a state where like maybe the feature's allowed in the control plane, but doesn't work with older nodes. And so it's the current state is actually something that could be improved. And I linked to a KEP that Daniel has in progress, which is maybe trying to talk about improving the way we toggle feature flags on, so that instead of just being tied to a release, it actually like can be more cluster aware. So if you had a cluster where all the nodes and the API server were on the newest version, then great, the feature enables. But if you still have nodes that were on an older version that didn't support a feature, maybe we wouldn't default the feature on. Maybe we would wait until your nodes supported it. So I think there's room for improvement in how we do feature rollouts. I think that's orthogonal to whether we have N-2 or N-3 support. But for those who are interested, I would definitely encourage reading Daniel's KEP and weighing in with an eye towards like skewed node control plane rollouts. Okay, that was all I had. If there are no more questions here, feel free to read the N-3 KEP and leave questions there, or ping me if there are things I forgot or you want to see, and we'll try to get it updated.
Maybe just the final TLDR, Jordan, is like, we're wanting to reach closure on this skew policy change this release, and then it would be retroactive such that 125 nodes would be expected to work with 128 control planes.
Yeah, so by default, like if we don't make any changes in the control plane in a new release, then they have just as good support for N-3 nodes as N-2 nodes. And so ideally, if it's not disrupting plans that SIGs have in place, I would like to see the next version of the control plane, 128, support back 3 versions, like keep as good support for 125 nodes as 127 had. So I tried to do some analysis like forward looking to see what plans SIGs had, and SIG storage was the only one that I could find. So yeah, I would like to have 128 control planes support 125 nodes just as well as 127 control planes did. That's my goal.
Did you meet with SIG storage? I can't remember if you had that on the list, and I was out last week.
SIG storage went over this last week, and the dropping the in-tree vSphere and Azure file plugin support were the only thing that would be impacted, and delaying that by 1 release would allow them to have N-3 support starting on 128 control planes.
Thanks.
All right.
All right. Thanks, Jordan and Derek. Folks on the call, please take a look at the KEP and chime in if you have any thoughts. Okay, moving on to the next topic. So,
sorry,
Marlo, sorry.
Sorry, Marlo. I just wanted to comment that for the in-place pod resource update, I had to take a closer look at the KEP, but from what I can tell, maybe it'll need some additional changes to ensure that if you request a resize on a pod that's running on a node that doesn't have this feature at all, then we reject that request early in the API server. Jordan, does that about sound right?
Maybe. Again, like we already have a skew, the possibility of skew, right? You could be running on a node that's 1 or 2 versions older. So
that is supported in my current plan. It's supported. N-3 is not.
Okay. All right. So yeah, let's sync up and look at what the in-place design was going to propose for skew handling and see if this adjusts anything.
Yeah, sounds good.
My feeling on this, Jordan, was that it would delay turning that feature on in the control plane by default by 1 release.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't preclude the ability of others to use that feature in clusters that they knew in their local deployment posture were at a satisfactory level. So to me, it changed when it defaulted to on. But yeah, if you and Vinay can sync up on that, that's kind of how I read our language.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, cool.
Any more thoughts or questions? All right. We can move on to the next topic. Marlo, are you on the call?
Yeah. So we're still making good progress with the CAP. We have to post updates. We've had some other work come up the last week, so we're a little behind where we wanted to be. But we're also looking for feedback from one of the main members. I think we had Dawn assigned to this, but Dawn hasn't made a lot of the calls. So I'm looking for help, right?
Is it time to maybe come to SIG Node and get feedback? Maybe present where we are at. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we're happy to do that post KubeCon. I think everyone's prepping for KubeCon, so we're happy to do that if that will help. But also, I was hoping to have, I don't know, Don, Derek, Sergey's already aware of what we're up to. We've been working with Francesco, Ed, Swati, Kevin. Yeah, we have a pile of people we've been working with.
Oh, is this? Apologies, I'm coming back from being out for a week. This is the same overall plugin design we were discussing in the past, where, like, to my knowledge, the issues that we were encountering was around bootstrapping.
Yeah,
Has there
we
been
can
a-
address, because we're gonna piggyback off the DRA stuff, that we're not worried necessarily of bootstrapping, at least in alpha. And then if we want to integrate, then we can start looking at the bootstrapping pieces.
Yeah, I guess so. That would just be the only thing I wasn't aware of, is if we had satisfactory resolution to, like, the bootstrapping challenges, or if there was a proposal to update them. I'll look to read through the link here, but I think I would kind of +1 Renal's feeling of, like, maybe have folks give an update on the latest state of the discussions for those who hadn't been able to attend. Because otherwise, yeah, I was under the impression that we were still blocked on the core bootstrapping problem.
No, we have that solved because we changed the design, and it's been that way for a while. So we've been waiting to get feedback before we came back. So if you think we're ready, we can do that post KubeCon. Happy to do that.
All right, excellent.
All right.
Thank
So
you.
maybe we can schedule it for the week after KubeCon. So I think that brings us to the end of the agenda, and I think next week is KubeCon. So do we want to cancel the call or keep it?
I think historically we've canceled the week of KubeCon, so
Okay. Yeah. All right. Meanwhile, folks, reach out on SIG Node if you have anything that you need. Thanks for joining. See you all in a couple of weeks. Bye now.